we'll be talking about a natural mineral that's not easily seen, but could be present in familiar items around you, such as paint, insulation, and automobile brake pads. It's asbestos, and it can be a very serious health risk for workers.
Asbestos is a white, fibrous, naturally occurring mineral that's often obtained from open-pit mines. Its crystalline structure can break down and release tiny fibers. Often, these fibers are so small they can be invisible to the naked eye. Unfortunately, this makes asbestos even more of an inhalation risk to those who don't even know it's present. Asbestos is extremely resistant to heat and chemicals, and because of these characteristics, it was widely used in many different applications. Therefore, your risk of being exposed to asbestos is greater than you might think. According to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, an estimated 1.3 million people in the U.S. are exposed every year to hazardous levels of asbestos in buildings and at various job sites. It's likely that all of us have had some level of exposure simply because of its widespread presence. History has taught us that asbestos exposure causes many health-related problems. The good news is that it is now considered a hazardous material, and its use has been limited or banned in many countries, including in the U.S.
Look all around you. If the room you're in was built before the 1980s, it's possible it contains asbestos. It wasn't until 1989 that the Environmental Protection Agency began a progressive ban on the use of asbestos.
Before the 80s, asbestos was used in virtually every conceivable location, in the walls of buildings, in brake shoes, gaskets, and even welder's gloves. In addition, it was used in electric ovens and hot plates because of its ability to protect the wiring from heat. Because of its resistance to heat, it was also put inside the walls of homes and buildings as a fire retardant. Though widely used, some locations present a higher risk of asbestos exposure than others do. Construction sites, especially where remodeling of older buildings is involved, pose a higher risk. Landfills may also pose a higher risk. Demolition garbage from older buildings often comes into the landfill, increasing your risk of exposure to asbestos. From a risk standpoint, there are two types of asbestos: non-friable and friable. A non-friable asbestos material is one in which the asbestos fibers are bound or locked into the product matrix so that the fibers are not readily released. Non-friable asbestos only presents a risk for fiber release when it's subject to significant abrasion, such as through sanding or cutting with electric power tools. Examples of non-friable asbestos products include vinyl asbestos floor tiles, acoustic ceiling tiles, and asbestos cement products. A friable asbestos product can be crumbled, pulverized, or powdered simply by hand pressure. If a friable asbestos-containing material is damaged or disturbed, it presents an inhalation risk because its fibers are more easily released into the air. Examples of friable materials include sprayed fireproofing on structural steelwork or thermal insulation on pipes. Some landfills are permitted to accept friable asbestos, but most are not. However, nearly all landfills receive non-friable asbestos as a simple matter of course. Many roll-off and contractor loads include building debris that contains some asbestos. As long as it does not become friable, the risk is minimal. For most landfill workers, the risk of exposure occurs when building debris is dumped, pushed, or compacted. During these activities, asbestos that is present in the material may become friable, and the resulting dust could be hazardous. Because it's impractical and virtually impossible to sample and test every load for the presence of asbestos, the best way to avoid the risk of breathing asbestos fibers is to simply avoid breathing the dust, period. People who are exposed to highly concentrated levels of asbestos are at risk of developing any number of cancers or a disease called asbestosis. That's a scarring of the lungs that could result in loss of lung function and may lead to death. Here are some guidelines that will help minimize your risk of exposure to asbestos. Treat all dusty loads as if they contained asbestos, because in fact, many of them do. Whenever possible, place dusty loads downwind of the active area and away from all customers and workers. Minimize the risk of creating dust by directing the drivers to dump as close to the face as possible. Work from the upwind side and minimize handling of the load. And if permitted, use the water truck to wet potentially dusty loads prior to pushing and compacting. When it comes to personal protective equipment, a simple dust mask is not an effective guard against asbestos. Proper protection requires the use of a respirator and special filters designed especially for work around asbestos. If your landfill accepts friable asbestos and you are required to wear a respirator, it's not enough to simply strap it on and get to work. We recommend you receive specific PPE training and be properly fitted for the respirator you'll be using. Airborne asbestos presents the greatest risk. If the asbestos is not airborne, there's little risk. Therefore, the first step is to minimize airborne asbestos dust by keeping the material wet. The second step is simply avoiding the dust whenever possible. While asbestos has received lots of negative publicity as a hazardous material, any dust could cause similar problems. The health effects of asbestos exposure are cumulative and long-term, taking perhaps decades to show up. So, unlike hitting your thumb with a hammer, where the injury and pain are closely connected, the effects of asbestos exposure show up years after the fact. So take heed. Avoid the risk, even if you don't feel an immediate resulting pain. If you think you may have been exposed to high concentrations of asbestos, speak with your supervisor. He can help direct you in what to do next, which could include seeing a doctor, getting regular checkups, and quitting smoking. Smoking can intensify the side effects of asbestos exposure, making workers even more susceptible to lung cancer and any number of asbestos-related diseases. Also, consider this. If your landfill receives a lot of demolition waste, especially from buildings constructed prior to the 1980s, suggest that the scale house attendant give those drivers a special tag that indicates to the landfill crew that the load may contain asbestos. This would help minimize your risk by causing higher risk loads to be handled differently.
It's easy to ignore the health risks of asbestos because the symptoms of exposure may not appear for years, but they are very real nonetheless.
Now let's summarize how to keep yourself safe from asbestos exposure. Remember, if the asbestos is friable, keep it damp to prevent the fibers from becoming airborne. Also, minimize the handling of dusty loads. If you must handle them, wear a respirator with the appropriate filter. In addition, place suspect loads downwind of other workers and customers to prevent them from possible asbestos exposure. If you're still uncertain about how to handle dusty loads at your landfill, talk to your supervisor about implementing a safety plan to keep asbestos from becoming a health hazard.
Okay, it's time to take the Safety Savvy test. Answering these questions will help prepare you for the real test you take every day at the landfill.
Which type of load typically has a greater chance of containing asbestos? A. Front loader. B. Rear loader. C. Roll-off. Or D. Green waste. Answer: C. Roll-off. This load just came into the landfill. If you suspect it could contain asbestos, what should you do? A. Notify your supervisor. B. Instruct the driver to dump the load downwind of the operation. C. Wet the load if possible. D. Minimize contact and dust by careful handling. E. Wear the appropriate respirator. Or F, all of the above. Answer: all of the above. Touching asbestos with your bare hands can cause serious injury or death. True or false? Answer: false. Touching asbestos poses little risk. However, breathing asbestos dust presents the greatest risk. What's the difference between friable and non-friable asbestos? Answer: friable asbestos can be crumbled, pulverized, or powdered by hand pressure. It presents an inhalation risk because its microscopic fibers are more easily released into the air. Non-friable asbestos fibers are bound or locked into the product's matrix so that the fibers are not readily released. Non-friable asbestos only presents a risk for fiber release when it's subject to significant abrasion.
If you work at a landfill, you could potentially be exposed to asbestos. Use what you've learned in this video to minimize your risk of exposure. And if you're not sure what to do in certain situations, ask your supervisor and be safe.
Thanks for watching this training video on landfill operations. We offer a wide selection of training videos and many other landfill consulting services. If you're looking for information on landfill operations, look to the company that's been redefining how landfills work since 1988. In fact, when it comes to landfill operations, we wrote the book, The Handbook of Landfill Operations. If you're interested in learning more about how landfills work, please contact us